afternoon. John Geib. Many of you know me because you've seen me in some of my other presentations that I've done. I've been a Master Gardener now for about 9 years. I've got a lot of the formal education for stuff, but I also have about 25 years running with drip irrigation and irrigation in general. Usually doing it all on my own because I can't afford an irrigation guy to come out and do it for me. So, I'm going to talk about a little bit today is drip irrigation mainly. I've done some presentations on irrigation in general. Those are on our YouTube channel, so you can go back and watch those. But we always end up talking a lot about drip, but never any of the real specifics about it, like how to put it together and that sort of stuff. So, we're going to talk about a little bit why we need to actually water, where we're going to be getting that water from, what we're actually watering, and then we'll talk a little bit about the drip. First three things will probably take maybe 5-8 minutes, and then the rest of it's going to be on the drip. So, well, we aren't in a desert officially. We kind of get that way most of the time. Beginning part of this year, we had 15 inches of rain in the first 4 or 5 months of the year, and for the most part, we haven't had any rain for the next 2 months, and probably won't get any more until after Thanksgiving, the way it's looking right now. So we run into these periods where we'll run into 4 or 6 months of time, period where we don't get any rainfall. Even our native and adaptive plants have a hard time surviving in that. So we have to add a little bit of irrigation to them just to make sure things stay alive. Okay? While we're getting the water, most of us live in city or at least near city, so we're connected up to a municipal water source. That's where we're probably going to be getting our water. Now, if we have an irrigation system, an actual irrigation system connected directly into the municipal water system, you actually do have to have that installed, any irrigation system like that, installed through an irrigation contractor. That's Texas law. They don't want you screwing stuff up and ending up contaminating the water system for the whole city by accident. So we actually have to do that. But short-term connections to a water system, like through a hose or something like that, is not covered under this, and that's how I usually actually run my drip systems, which we'll talk about. If you're out in the county, a lot of times you're going to be running on well water. The one problem that we do run into with well water, though, a lot of times, is that the water is not as high quality as city water. It's got a lot higher dissolved salts in it, and so you end up with a lot more calcium buildup, which can be a problem with irrigation systems. We can always do rainwater collection. I'm out a little bit further out from the city, still close enough that I actually am connected to the water system, but I do rainwater collection off of my barn. I've got about 10,000 gallons worth of storage on it. If I'm being careful, I can probably run about 3 months without ever touching city water if I really wanted to. So, but that's one of those things that's very nice about having a little bit of property where you can collect a lot of rainwater and be able to have a lot of storage capacity for it. Other thing you can do is just let Mother Nature water for you. But like I said, even if you can do it, it works for most of the plants around here, but they won't really look quite as pretty. Okay. Now, what are we watering? Well, if you can have a lawn like this, I'm glad you make that much money. But that's going to take a lot of water to keep that grass green. It's also going to take a lot of maintenance to keep it up, both in the form of fertilizing it, mowing it, and then dealing with any irrigation systems that you've got to keep that thing watered. So, I prefer more of this type of a look. Being a nice, lots of flowers, lots of pretty, something a little different than just a big green field. This, though, takes about 1/4 of the water that grass field does per square foot. So we can save a lot of money and effort dealing with just flowers instead of grass. You can go the other extreme, go with the Xeriscape. I do not recommend Xeriscape around here. While it works, because we get enough wind to blow in weed seeds and enough moisture that a lot of those weed seeds will germinate. So Xeriscape landscaping can look good some of the time, but a lot of the time it's going to look very weedy because you're going to have weeds popping up all the time. So you're going to have to go around and pull weeds a lot more in a xeriscape type landscape. So. Or you can do kind of like what I do. I don't water my house. This isn't my house specifically. I'll show you mine here in a minute. But I don't water the grass. I water my trees occasionally, but very little. The only thing I water is my flower beds and my vegetable beds. For the most part, I let Mother Nature take care of the rest. Until July, middle of July, my yard actually looked pretty nice this year. Right now, it's dead, just because it's gone into dormancy because it's not had any rainfall since then. So if you're in town, or even near town, you probably are living in a subdivision of some sort. Subdivisions, for the most part, have not changed in the last 50 years or so around Abilene. If you're buying a house in Abilene that's in more of the cityized area, this is what you're getting. You're getting about 5,000 square feet of lawn because it's cheap and easy for the contractor to have put it in. You're getting 4 to 6 1-gallon flowers, possibly, placed somewhere in your yard, and 1 5-gallon tree. That's a standard contractor package for what your landscape's going to look like. So if you're in the newer areas of town, say out towards Potosi or going down Buffalo Gap, down towards Tuscola or something, you're going to be looking like the upper left. No trees. You've got a tree in there, you just can't see it yet because it's still small. You know, you're talking a 5-gallon tree is probably going to be 4.5, 5 foot tall, little stick-looking thing. Now, if you're more in town, you're looking down more like the lower right picture. Notice you're still looking at 5,000 square feet of grass. Probably don't have any of those plants because those usually were not selected properly by the contractor to actually get something that's going to survive here. So you usually are just dealing with grass and your 1, maybe 2 trees that, in case somebody a long time ago planted an extra tree. So, but otherwise they're almost identical. So what you end up having though probably, drive down the street and this is what it looks like. Same house after same house after same house because they all were basically done the same way when they were being contracted out. Little things can make that house stand out pretty heavily. A small little flower bed up to the front of the street will work really well to make your house pop. If I'm a delivery driver and I'm going down that street, I'm hoping really hard that your address is sticking out nice and pretty. But if I say, oh, it's the one with the flower bed in the front, it probably is going to stand out and it's going to be real easy for somebody to find. Okay. One thing I will warn about something like this though, make sure you have a very good solid border between your flower bed and your grass. Bermuda can smell water from about 5 miles away and it will come to wherever the water is being put in. So, you can pull out a lot of your grass, put in a little oasis. This is like somebody's done this with their backyard. Really nice. Something like this is actually also going to be very beneficial to the environment. It's a very welcoming habitat for both bees, butterflies, but also things like hummingbirds. So and it makes a very nice, peaceful relaxation point in your backyard if you don't have need for an actual grass backyard. This is my house. As you notice, I have lots of flowers. I water about once a week at most. And these lantana bushes, they're sitting about that tall and they're about that wide. This picture was actually taken last week. How long have we been having 100-degree temperatures? They're blooming. Solid mass of flowers. You walk by that thing and it's humming with all the bees and butterflies. It's absolutely gorgeous. I do roses in my yard. A lot of times Master Gardeners right now we are not really recommending putting in roses because of rose rosette disease, but I like roses. I'll suffer the consequences if I have to deal with it, but I am putting roses in. I also have a couple container pots just to kind of make it look a little nicer. All of the plants that I have except for my roses, I usually try and do native and adaptive plants. This plant here is called Flamicanthus. I got that as a baby last year. You can see how well it likes it. It's in full sun, middle of the heat, doesn't care. It gets a little bit of water and it grows like a weed. I've got some Turk's cap up here. I've got some salvias, some coreopsis. My main problem is why my beds look so sparse right now. I have chickens that free range. They don't eat the plants, they just dig them up. So if you're thinking about getting chickens and letting them free range, understand you usually need to plant 2 or 3 times as many plants as you actually want, because that's usually how many they'll take out. So what are we watering? Well, when we're talking drip, you can do your lawn in drip. It's not, I don't really recommend it for the average person, but it can be done. If you check my irrigation video, I go into a fairly good description of how to do that if you want to do drip in your lawn. Water features. If you have things like a pond or a fountain or something like that, I don't recommend trying to use drip to keep that filled up. That doesn't work real well. The only water feature that I would recommend doing on drip is actually just a dripper for things like bees and butterflies. You can buy them where they hook up, and it's just a little dripper that will drip onto a concrete patio stone, and that wet stone is all that is needed for bees and butterflies to get enough moisture to survive off of. And it's not enough to drown them, but it's enough to keep them nice and well. The thing is, even with the slowest drippers on those things, you're putting about 12 gallons of water a day onto that. And so you have to figure out there's going to be some runoff from that. So you need to put that somewhere where you have a little bit of a soggy spot in your ground. You're not going to worry about it too much. So what we're going to be talking about for the drip irrigation, for the most part, is going to be flower beds, trees, and vegetable gardens. Okay? Trees are real easy. If you think of a tree is basically an umbrella. All the rain that comes down hits the tree lit canopy, flows off, and lands all the way around in what we call the drip line. Okay? This is where the edge of the tree pattern is. It's very easy to figure out where it is. It's usually where you start losing all of your grass, because the grass can't grow underneath the shady tree. But that's where also all of the roots are that absorb all the nutrients and the moisture for the tree to grow. About 90% of them are right in that one little area where the drip line is. So if you want to do drip for trees, it's very simple to just run a single line of drip hose around that drip line and water it there. The only problem that you have with that is running over it with lawnmowers, because if you do that, it doesn't work real well. Yes, Tanya?
I've always wondered, as your tree grows, are you supposed to expand your drip?
Yeah, as the tree grows, you want to try and keep it in that drip line. Now, when you're doing it when it's young, like a 5-gallon tree, as it slowly grows out, it's going to be needing to be expanded probably every year or two. But once it gets to be a fairly mature tree, that drip line's not going to change very much, and so you can just kind of leave it where it's at. When you do drip for out in the yard like that, especially if you're doing it around trees, one of the things that will help save you from running over it with lawnmowers is stakes. You can get these at the same place you get the drip irrigation stuff, and stake these into the ground so that it keeps it held down below grass level, so you don't mow over it quite so badly. Yes, ma'am?
Is that drip line rule true for things like pecans that have a big taproot?
Yes. They will get some more of their water from the taproot, but for the most part, they're still trying to get most of their water from that drip line, from what I understand. Okay. So, now we're talking about flower beds. Well, how much are we going to have to water those flower beds? Well, that depends on the species. As Master Gardeners, we're recommending always going with the native, or at least native adapted plants. Things that take minimal amount of water, and also ones that can handle our heat and cold. Okay? So we're looking at that for the most part for what we're going to design into our gardens. And then once we do that, we're looking at probably watering once a week. We're running to try and get a nice, long, deep soaking water so that we can get encourage those roots to go deep. We want nice, deep roots on all of our plants. The deeper they are, the more drought tolerant they are. So if we don't water for a week or two, it's not going to kill them. They're still drawing out moisture from the subsurface. If you water very frequently, especially with things like grasses, if you're watering every day or every other day, your root base is very shallow, and so you end up with plants that can't take long droughts or even not being watered for a couple of days, but also since the roots are right there at the surface, especially in the heat like we're having today, and this whole month really, that heat can actually kill off some of the roots and make it, so it's very hard to keep that grass growing. So we want to get water more infrequently to get that the roots going down deeper. What we're looking at though usually on average is about an inch of rainfall a week during the growing season. Now when we're talking off season like wintertime when things aren't growing as much or not growing at all, we may cut back to a 1 inch of rain every 3 to 4 weeks. Just enough to keep the roots alive, but that's about it. First thing we're going to need to do when we're talking about drip irrigation, figure out where we're going to put it, we need to know where our plants are. Okay? I'm an engineer and draftsman by training. I like playing with 3D modeling software. That's why mine look all nice and pretty. Doesn't have to be that way. It can be something as simple as just a hand-drawn picture. Okay? If you've got a kid that likes to draw, you have friends or family that are real good or fairly decent artists, a lot of times ask them to help you out with this planting stuff. Okay? So it doesn't take much. But when you look at my gardens here, I've got a nice patio. Here's that lantana hedge that I have. I've got some roses. Most of these are not planted. I've just got the ones on the end right now. I've got some roses in here. I've got all these natives and stuff that we were talking about, the Turk's cap, the Flamacanthus. I got some butterfly crack over here, otherwise known as Greg's blue mist. Just a lot of little native plants that are very well adapted to our area. Okay, so I want to draw out my plan for my drip irrigation, what I'm going to need for each of the plants that I'm watering. I want to try and group those plants together as much as possible so that as I'm watering them, I don't have to worry this one's getting too much water, this one's not getting enough. Like when I was talking about the roses, roses need 2 to 3 inches of rainfall a week to really be good and blooming. Okay, well, if I'm running a native plant like a lantana, if I put 3 inches of water on a lantana a week, it's going to get stressed out because it's drowning, literally, in water. So we want to try and make sure we keep those things separate, at least for the watering. Okay? Another way to look at your drawing for your plans, Google Earth. Google Earth is wonderful on this one aspect alone. You can sit there and print out a screenshot of it and then doodle on that, have that printout and just doodle on it, and it's very easy to go because everything's already to scale, all the buildings are there, all the sidewalks are there, all you have to do is put in what you want to add to it. Okay? And like I said, Sharpies or pen work real well for this. Me, on the other hand, I go the excessive draftsman route like I always do, but that's me. Nice thing about it, when I do it this way, I can also turn on and off layers, so I can just pull out, say, my drip irrigation system like this. Now, my drip irrigation system currently is being run from my hose bib, okay, which is the little faucet on the side of the house. It's very simple, very easy. Turn it on, turn it off. That's all I need to do once per week, just to make sure it's done. Officially, it's a temporary setup until I can get a automatic sprinkler system set in. It's been temporary for 3 years so far. Works. Yeah, it works for now, and one of these days I'll get a chance to actually put in what I like. So I've got my hose bib here. I do the engineering draftsman stuff. The little X thingy is a valve. That's the actual hose bib. I immediately come off of that into a 4-way splitter. You can buy these splitters at the garden centers, box stores. They look like this. They have their own valves to cut off each segment, so they're very nice and handy to take one faucet and turn it into 3, 4, 6, however many you need, just by adding a couple of extra splitters to them. From there, I've got 4 systems that I actually run for 4 different areas. Okay. Like I said, this is temporary, so I don't actually have all 4 set up this way, but this is how it will eventually be run in the future. I've got one that runs up along the side of the house, nice and easy, just for a few things over there. One of the reasons this one's not installed right now is long-term, that patio that you see here is actually going to be extended all the way up to the house. I'm trying to keep some of the stuff that I've got right up next to the house away from the house so I don't end up with things like termites getting into the house. So I want to put a hardscape right up to the house so I don't have to worry about that. But I'm also going to be putting in some potted plants. Okay, put them in nice containers, pull them off from the house a little bit so I don't have to worry about the bugs, but I want the color that those pots will bring in. Okay, so I'll do this is actually a drip system into the containers, which I'll show how to do here in a minute. The rest of this is just running a bunch of different loops. When you're doing drip systems, you usually want to do everything in a loop. That way, if something gets kinked somewhere in the middle of the hose by whatever, you have water that can go from either side to the drip emitters. Very nice thing to have. Did it again. My roses, I actually have kind of set up as individuals, rings for each one. I'll show you what they look like here in a little bit. They're on their own system. Like I said, they need 2 to 3 times as much water. So instead of running my drip system once a week for them to give them the inch of water, I'm going to be running about 2 or 3 times a week to give them the same amount, to make sure they have enough water. So, future expansions, I've got an orchard that's all over on the other side of my house. I'm going to be running that off of drip also. So. Now, when you go buy your parts and equipment, for the most part, when you're buying your drip irrigation tubing and hosing, okay, this is the tubing that we usually get. It's got the emitters built into it, which I'll show you here in a minute. Do not go to the box stores and buy this. They sell junk, okay? It's the mass commercial stuff. Go to the irrigation stores. There's 2 in town. One is on Treadway, the other one is just off of Treadway towards the south end of town. They sell much better quality stuff. It's a little more expensive, but considering the hassle that you'll run into buying the junk from the big box stores, you'll save the extra money that you spend on the equipment in Advil for the headaches that you're going to cause yourself. Okay? That's how bad the stuff is. Yes?
I'm not disputing going to the box store, but why? What are the problems that you have found with it?
They're notorious for popping off. The equipment is not, the tolerances aren't tight enough. This stuff, the tolerances are very tight. They fit very tightly together, and so they keep together very nicely. The emitters that they have in the ones at the box store have a tendency to clog also. So these don't. And I'll talk about that in a minute. So the popping off and the breaking of the connections is the really big one, though, when you're talking about headaches, because you'll go out there and you'll have run the system for an hour, and you'll find out you've got a lake out there because a joint popped off, and it's been running water full blows for 45 minutes. So when you're looking to install. You can actually connect if you do have an existing irrigation system, you can actually connect your drip to the irrigation system. The key thing to think about on this, you cannot mix the pop-up sprinkler heads and the drip system in the same system, okay? So you'll have to cap off all of if you want to switch over a flower bed system from a pop-up sprinkler to a drip system, you'll have to cap off all of those sprinkler heads except for 1 or 2, and run all of your drip from those 2. When we're looking at these, your standard pop-up sprinkler system will run like this. You'll have your irrigation line running down. They'll have a riser that comes up, okay, and then the pop-up sprinkler head to it. These things are pretty easy to undo. You just unscrew them, and then you can just buy a cap that'll actually fit onto these, and you can screw it in and tighten it down so that it's sealed off. Okay. They also make connections for these for the drip, where you actually just pull, the riser will come up, you'll remove your pop-up sprinkler head, and you'll put a new cap on here that'll actually convert it over to the drip. So it's nice and easy. All right. One key thing to think about when we're dealing with drip irrigation systems, we do need to reduce the pressure, okay? House pressure usually runs anywhere from 40 to 60 psi. Most of these fittings are only designed to handle 58 psi. And so if you're closer to one of the water towers, you can have somewhere up to about 70 psi of water pressure at your house. Those will pop your fittings off, even the good quality ones. So we want to reduce the pressure down to the correct range. These pressure reducers, you can get them in line. They're going to look something like this. I'll show another picture here in a second. But yeah, that's the key thing that we want to do, is make sure we don't get too much pressure in our system. It also, when the drip emitters are putting out their water flow, they're based on a certain pressure. So if we're outside of that range, we're either getting too much or not enough water through those drip emitters. Okay, all sorts of different parts that you can get for the drip systems. Anything from elbows, tees. Those are some of the ones that you'll do just to get your main setup put out. If you have any issues long term, say cutting it with a shovel, possibly, squirrels. Turns out squirrels love drip irrigation systems because they smell the water and they try and find the water, so they'll chew into the line. So you have to kind of keep an eye out for that. These little couplings are great because all you need to do is just cut your line, make sure you got it nice and clean on both ends, and just pull your system together and put that fitting in. Works real well to make a repair. This is one of the fittings that you can use to switch between a threaded connection and the barbs that we use for the drip irrigation system. When you're running outdoor irrigation, you'll find you run into two types of pipe threads. The first one is called National Pipe Thread. If it's a PVC fitting, you're pretty much dealing with a National Pipe Thread. This is it's a very fine thread. It's a tapered thread. It works well for things like your irrigation systems and stuff like that. The only problem that you'll run into those when you're dealing with plastic versions of them, National Pipe Thread has a tendency to leak because you can't tighten it down tight enough. So what you're really going to want to do is use some pipe tape or pipe dope to make sure that those joints seal. This is the little Teflon tape that you'll hear everybody talk about if they ever talk to you about plumbing. This is what it kind of looks like. It comes in little rolls. It's real cheap, and it's a lifesaver for fixing a lot of those leaks and threaded joints. This one is actually a hose connection. This is the other type of thread that you'll run into in irrigation. So if your hose bib, things like that, they're all going to be fitted with this a little bit coarser thread. Those two connections sort of work together. You can kind of get them to fit together and screw in, but they leak. So you got to be careful which ones you're working with. Do remember, if you are dealing with hoses and hose thread, you will need a washer, the hose washer in there. Okay, so don't forget to have some of those. Like I said, this is the pressure reducer. There is another version of it that looks a little bit different. Looks kind of like this and does the same thing, but it's just a simple pressure reducer to make sure that you get that pressure down to the range that you're looking for. So, these little valves are kind of useful, especially if you've got one section that you may have a couple of different beds or something running off of a single line, but you may want to be able to shut off a single bed. This works well in vegetable gardens, and I'll show you how I use them in my vegetable gardens. So the drip system, like I said, we've got the basic tubing. The emitters are actually put inside the tubing. And as you can see, though, it's clear on most of it. It's just that emitter only takes up about half of the space. This allows to make sure that if an emitter does get clogged up, it doesn't block the flow going downstream. Okay, so you always have water in that whole line, and then just back pressures up through that emitter. The emitter itself, it's got a little bit of a natural grate on it to keep big chunks of dirt out of the emitters so that they don't clog up. And then inside the emitter, they've got this nice little plastic piece that actually vibrates slightly as the water's flowing through it. What works well is when this stuff was designed, it was designed for a very salty environment. And so, you run the system, it gets all that salt water onto the components. That when they stop watering, it dries out, and you get that calcium buildup, okay, which is always a pain, especially if you're running off of well water. Well, what happens is when you start the water flow the next time, that plastic piece in there vibrates and it breaks off all of that calcium deposit in the emitter itself. And so all of that calcium gets flowed out into the water, and so it never clogs up the emitter. I've got some of my emitters I actually brought from my house in Midland. We were running on a well water over there with probably anywhere from 300 to 500 parts per million of total dissolved solids, which I can tell you is very salty. But some of those emitters that I have in my system right now have been running 5 years on that water and 3 years over here, and I've never had an emitter fail with this stuff. This is why I was saying, you buy the good stuff from the irrigation store. I've never had an emitter in 8 years fail because I use the high quality stuff. So, this is how I connect my drip system. Like I said, works well. It's not connected permanently, officially, to the water source or the community water system. So I can go ahead and run my irrigation system like this. This line right here is the one I have to my orchard. Now remember, I said if I need to pressure reduce that. But notice I don't have a pressure reducer right there. The reason is that orchard is about 150 feet from this faucet. Okay, I've got this trenched over so that it's buried and I don't have to worry about it. But I ran a sink. I've got a joint here and a joint there, a couple of elbows. And then from there all the way out to that orchard, I've got a single line of run of blank tubing that doesn't have any emitters in it. Okay? Over that length of period of time, I've got a little bit of a pressure drop, but at that end of the line, right before the orchard, I do have a pressure reducer to keep the pressure where it needs to be, just to make sure. Okay? But the other one, as soon as it comes off the house fitting, I put it straight into a pressure reducer. Okay? Like I said, we've got a couple of different styles of connections that you can use. This one is a small PVC fitting. I've got one up here that you can come and look at. One end of it is set to be for the hose, which is what's connected onto the hose bib. The other one is an MPT fitting that screws into that pressure regulator. So I don't have any worry about any joints breaking loose because of overpressure. From there, comes out, I've got one of those, the other threaded ones, that's MPT, goes to the barb, and then I've got my lines running off to go to all my different flower beds.
So your drip is manual though?
My drip currently is manual. The one thing I will recommend, if you do run these, as soon as you go to turn on the water, set a timer. Yeah. I can tell you I've done this way too many times and spent way too much money running these for 6 to 8 hours because I forgot about them.
John,
Yes, ma'am.
so on my hose where I fill my pond, I put one of those like little twisty timers
Yep,
that just go up to 2 hours.
that'll work.
Could that go there and then the other one attached to it?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, it wouldn't be a problem to run one of those old manual timers.
Do you have a backflow preventer?
No, I do not.
You know, in the city?
In the city, you're supposed to, yes. But, like I said,
In the RV park?
you should have one right here. When my house was built, they never put on a backflow preventer. So, the backflow preventer usually is going to come right off of your hose bib. For those of you in the city, that's where it'll be.
Why, when you're doing a watering system, you're not having any source of water input into the hose, why would you need a back?
The concept is that because your hose system is out in the ground or near the ground, it can, in theory, siphon water back into your system And once your house gets contaminated, it can eventually back filter into the main city system. That's why they prevent that.
I'm turning it off.
Yes, turning it off, it should shut it off, but in reality, there could be some slight leakage back through, especially people that have leaky faucets. That's the ones they're worried about.
John, what time of day do you run yours?
Mine, I usually run it right around sunset. One of the problems I have with running mine earlier in the day, I have ducks that free range, and so they see that nice wet ground and they start digging. And that can be an issue. So I have to run it when the ducks are put up. So, usually if we're watering, we're usually trying to shoot for mornings or late evenings. And so I just do mine in late evenings. Because it is the drip irrigation system, I don't have to worry so much about mold or mildews forming on my plants from sprinkler systems, getting them wet and letting them stay wet overnight. So that's the nice thing about drip. You can kind of run it whenever you want. Yes, Don?
I was gonna say, in my drip system I put in the greenhouse, I bought an electronic timer to put on the faucet.
Yeah, like those little electronic timers will work very well also.
Yeah.
So, like I said, mine's been temporary for 3 years until I can get my new one installed. Yes, ma'am?
Do drip systems always have to be above the ground, or can you put it below the mulch, or?
I usually try and run mine below the mulch. You can, in theory, run it below ground. There is instructions on the company's websites usually how to do it underground. Yeah, I usually just do it above ground. It's a whole lot easier system to install. If you're doing a lawn install, a lot of times, especially if you're doing a new lawn, that's actually the time to do it is before you actually lay your sod. So that you can just lay it right underneath the sod layer. Okay, now, I was telling you I have roses that need 3 times as much water. Well, on plants like that need a lot more water, I'll usually actually do a ring. This actually is that ring. I cut it out this morning because I needed a sample. So, but I'll show you here in a second how I'll fix it. Y'all remember your high school math? Circumference of a circle? Yeah, 2 pi r. So the easy way to figure out how much you're going to need for one of these circles, you usually want them about 2 feet in diameter. And so that ends up being a 6-foot length of hose. This one's actually 5 feet, but it works pretty well. That gives you a nice good circle of moisture. When you're running drip out of these emitters will give you about a 1-foot diameter circle in about 1 hour. Okay, especially in a nice good clay environment like most of us are in. So when that drips in, you're looking, this whole ring right in the center won't get watered, but everything out here will. So on a plant like this, those roots will very quickly spread out into that moist zone, and so you have you actually get it watering, 5-6 inches of rainfall a week instead of just the 1, because the clay soil will keep a hold of that moisture pretty well. And so my roses love these rings. You can do these over individual plants also if you've got one kind of out in the middle of nowhere. Now, like I said, this one, when I go home, I need to put it back in. I have a repair that I need to work on. Here's my little coupling I need to do. Now, these fit in pretty tight. I've got reasonably strong hands, so I don't have a problem with it. I use shampoo. This is an old bottle of Johnson's baby shampoo that I used. It was an extra. That nice slippery soap, I'll put a drip of it right on the edge of this before I stick it in. It makes it slide in a lot easier. If you're doing this, try and do any connections when the temperatures are above 50 degrees, and I would recommend above 70 degrees. This pipe, especially when it's cold, gets hard, and it's much harder to put fittings in. Yes, ma'am?
As I've gotten older, my hands are not as strong.
Yeah.
And what I have is just an inexpensive heat gun. You can get them at like Harbor Freight for 20.
Yeah, the heat gun works. The only problem I would worry about with the heat gun on something like this is if you get it too hot, it will damage it permanently and it may not.
You'd have to be careful. Just a second or two.
Yeah.
An alternate way is get a big cup of hot water.
Yeah, hot water would work better because
And
it's
then make the hose soft, and then you slide it right in.
The other thing that I use that works real well, for me, I'll get these just kind of started in a little bit. It's not even actually holding in there. If I let go, it's going to fall off. I'll find a rock or something like that, and just kind of set it up nice and vertical, and then I can press into it. That way it's not actually hand strength trying to grip onto this small piece. It's, you can grab the whole big hose, and as long as you keep it nice and straight, you can force it in pretty easily.
That's funny, and then you got your other.
Yeah, but then, usually with the other one, you're still dealing with the other hose from the other side. So it's usually not too bad. This works especially well when you're dealing with the elbows. These elbows, the ends have a tendency to get really hard on your hands if you're trying to push them in. So that's the elbows. Even for me, I almost always make sure I'm up against a rock to put these in place. But now all I have to do when I get home is take that and just stick it into the other hose, and it'll be fixed right back up. Now, I planted 2 roses earlier this year. There was this one. Notice how nice and big that rose is. And then this one. Okay, planted at the same time, looked identical when I planted them. The one got the ring, so it's getting 5 inches of rainfall every week. This one, it had a little bit of an issue with chickens getting near it early in the season, which is why I've got some rock around it. But it only has 3 drip emitters in it. I've got a line here, a line here, and then I've got a line here. So it's got a drip emitter there, there, and there. This one is much more stunted. It's not getting quite enough water. Okay, so those rings work really well around plants that need a lot more water.
So would you potentially, as a solution, then get a ring and tap into the...
Yeah, I could either put this one in a ring, but because of the location, whatever it is, what I'll probably do is come across, I'll add a T here and here, and I'll probably add 2 drip emitters right there just to give it the same amount of water. So it's just kind of playing around with it to make sure that those plants get the water that they really need for those. The other reason I don't want to get too much water here, this is a baby flame acanthus from that big one that I have from last year. Yeah, it's already sent off babies and they're growing, and they're growing fast. So if I'm not careful, they're going to take over the whole garden. So now when we're talking containers, containers work real well with drip. Don says he runs all of his. The difference that you run into with drip for the containers, you usually are using 1/4 inch drip tubing. That's what this stuff looks like. Okay, and you'll just put the drip emitters in the containers themselves. This type of drip tubing you can actually get at the box stores, and it's not a major issue. The box stores actually are probably the better place to buy it. It'll be cheaper, and it's the same stuff. The nice thing is, though, if you have a set of drips that you're running for your main flower bed, you just have a couple of pots like I do on the edge, you can buy this tool right here. Works very nicely to come in, take your drip line, set it up in here. Be very careful you don't put a hole through your hand. And it sticks in and it punches a hole right in your drip line. You can then take your 1/4 inch drip tubing and it fits in and it's sealed up nice and tight. So it works really well. It's one of those things that you can mix and match on these without too much problem. So it actually works pretty nice.
Would that type of hose then work best in a raised flower or garden vegetable
No, I'll show you vegetables here in a minute. So, like I said, we've got the different types of drip emitters. The drip emitter that you see on the end here is the one I've got here. These are fairly cheap and easy. They do clog every couple of years. The best way to fix that is to cut them off and replace them. Okay? They're cheap and easy, and it's not a big deal. The ones like this, which is it's like an inline version of the drip emitter. It actually has a hole all the way through, and then there's a little hole right there that actually emits out the water. These work reasonably well, but the problem is these work nice because you can kind of run the little hose right to where you want it. These, you kind of have to run the hose right across wherever you're doing it, so it's not quite as easy to do individual pots. When you're working with drip irrigation systems like this and putting it into a regular drip system, I would recommend highly building your entire 1/4-inch tubing system and having it ready to go and punch into your main drip line, and everything ready before you do that actual punch through. The reason is, yes, these work well to fit in here, but if you mess with them too much, they'll wallow out a little bit, and you'll end up with a leak here. Okay, so be very careful with that. The other reason I warn you is because these T-fittings, which you'll use, you'll have like a drip line coming in, and then you'll run a separate one up to the pot. These T-fittings have a tendency to break because this hosing is very hard to put together. And so when you're squeezing these together, a lot of times I don't know how many of the T's I've broken trying to put them together.
They break during installation?
During installation, just trying to cram them together. They're thin plastic. So the ends that work into the main drip line are a lot thicker for some reason. I don't know why. But the T's are very thin and have a tendency to break. Yes, ma'am?
Sorry, a little squirrel moment, unintended. You talked about the squirrels getting in the line.
Yes.
How do you catch that?
The same way I'm repairing this, that coupling that I put in here, okay, I'll just cut they'll shoot a hole into it, I'll cut it, put a coupling on both sides, and repair it right there. So that way it doesn't take up any actual length of hose, because the little bit you cut out is actually used up in the little bit of a gap that is created here.
John, I had that problem in my pergola because I have the 1/4-inch tubing all over it for hanging pots.
Yeah.
And the squirrels, I have to go out every week and turn on the system and see where it was squirting out. That ended when 2 feral cats took up residence under my pergola.
Yeah, that's one way. The dogs, the cats can help with a little bit with the squirrels. The other thing to think about, they're looking for water.
Yes.
Give them a water source. A small pot of water, preferably in a location that they feel safe drinking from. So, we're talking behind a bush, not out in the middle of the yard, but off to the side, something like that. Something where they can get the water and they won't start chasing your drip tubing. So that's one thing to think about.
Instead of having a bird bath, you have one for a squirrel bath.
Yeah, basically. So just something to keep them from getting into what you want. So. Now, vegetable gardens and raised beds. Usually raised beds and vegetable gardens, the soil is a much better quality than the typical clay that we have, and so it drains a lot better. So that becomes a problem when we're trying to run for an hour to get our 1 inch of rainfall. It drains so fast that you aren't actually getting the good spread on the water. So what we try and do usually with vegetable and raised beds, we'll take that, we'll water more often for less length in time. So maybe twice a week for a half hour, just depends on how the soil works. And then also, because we are only going for a half hour, our 1 foot diameter circle is going to be much smaller. And so we need to put those drip lines a little bit tighter together to get that same amount of moisture. Okay? If you're doing like more of a row type plant, so think broccoli, cabbage, tomatoes, something where there's a little bit larger plant, you probably get by with about 6-inch spacings between your lines of drip. That's what it looks like up on the left. As you can see, I make sure that, when I run these, when I plant my plants, I'll adjust their actual location so that they're a little bit closer to a drip. So like the lettuce is supposed to be about every 6 to 8 inches. That gives me a couple of inches I can play with to make it a little bit closer to wherever that drip emitter is to make sure it's getting enough water. Okay. Now, if we're running a crop more along the lines of asparagus or onions or garlic, something that's a lot tighter spacing a lot of times, I'll actually run it down to 4-inch spacing on the drip. The one thing you have to remember though, this 8-foot bed that's about 3 feet wide has 50 drip emitters in that. So if I let that one run by accident for any length of time, I'm burning a lot of water very quickly. Okay, so I got to make sure that these things are actually running just that short amount of time. How I have my vegetable garden set up, I have one main drip line of blank that goes all the way down all of my different raised beds. And from there, each bed has its own separate line that tees off of that main feeder line. And from there, I have an actual valve, one of those little black plastic valves I showed you, that inline. So if I've got a bed that's I'm not actually growing anything in right now, I can just shut that bed off and I don't have to worry about it getting watered while everything else is watering. So that's where I really like using those small valves. And that should be it. Yeah. Okay. Before we ask questions, let me point out a couple things. We are on Facebook and YouTube. We are Big Country Master Gardeners on both locations. All of the presentations that we have been doing over the last 18, 19 months at the library, all but I think 2 are up there online. So those have a lot of good information, anything from landscape design, turf, to irrigation and vegetable gardening, butterfly gardening, all sorts of different things. We also have the Saturday seminars presentations that we do are also online for those. They usually take about 2 weeks after we've actually done the presentation for us to get it back up online. So you have that. So, questions? Yes, ma'am.
The drip tape, is that?
The drip tape is a little bit cheaper variety of tape of drip. From what I understand on the drip tape, you actually have to replace that every couple of years. It just can't hold up long term.
Is it from the heat or from calcium?
Basically from sunlight deteriorating the actual tubing, from what I understand. Especially down in the Texas
Can you bury
side.
that underneath your compost or whatever
You could in theory, but from what I understand, you still need to replace it usually every couple of years. So I would recommend we use the high quality stuff here, and once it's in, it's permanent, pretty much. So, yes, ma'am.
When are your classes for the library?
Okay, library classes are first Tuesday of the month. We do a program down at the mall library location at 6 p.m. That presentation is given again a second time, the second Friday of the month at 10 a.m. down at the downtown location. So that's when those are done. Our Saturday seminars, I believe we only have one more this year, and it will be the last Saturday of August.
And what's the class coming up for?
The next class for the library is Texas Superstars. And so it will be all the different flowering plants and stuff and trees and possibly that are really good for our area. So, and I don't know what Saturday seminar is.
Have it on my sheet.
Okay. So, other questions about drip?
I wanted to comment, you said no drip in the pond.
Usually as like a water replacement in a pond.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I bought the evaporative cooler float valve
Yeah.
and put it on a strap over the edge of my little concrete pond.
Yeah.
so it's constant level.
Yeah, if you're gonna do a replacement, water replacement on something like a pond, you're gonna want some form of a float level. The problem with using a drip for something like that, it has a tendency to have things stick occasionally, and it's hard to kind of keep things just how you want it. So, other questions on drip? Okay. I will leave my stuff up here. You're free to come up, take a look at all the different piece parts that I've got. If you want to take a look. I've got a bunch of these pieces of tubing and stuff like that up here. These are free to go ahead and take if you want to take a look at them and take them home. The only ones I don't want you to take home would be the pieces that I've actually have cut in half, because those are demonstrations so people can see. So, when you're installing drip, two things I forgot about. Cutting drip. Got this from my father-in-law. I don't know where he got it, but it's just a simple knife. Works wonders. You can cut drip with these drip things with just about anything that's got a nice sharp edge. So we're talking anything from a pocket knife to a pair of wire cutters, PVC cutters, anything like that. As long as it's got a reasonably sharp edge, then it can cut through it pretty nicely. What was the other thing I was going to say? Oh, when you're dealing with drip in containers, okay, in this 1/4-inch tubing, I recommend getting stakes, okay, to go ahead and plant them into the stake so that they stay in the drip, in the pot. If they don't have a stake, they have a tendency to slide out and not stay in. Now, you've got two types of stakes that you can get. One is this type, which is the type I do not recommend. These fit over the drip tubing and then go in. They're a little hard to get in, and they're pretty much permanent once you got them in there. So it's a little bit, they don't work quite as well. The ones that work a little bit better, they actually just have a little C-clip that kind of hooks over it and hooks them into the drip. So, okay, anything else? Okay, Kathy with some more door prizes, I think.